We're on Daf Ayin Ches, about 11 lines down from the top. And the Gemara quotes the Mishnah, Hazor get l'toch cheka or l'toch kalsa migoreshes. So the Gemara asks Amai, how does that get validate? Harei kelov shalokeh p'shus mocherhu. Isn't this a case where the kalsa, which is her kli, is in the rishus of the Baal, and the Gemara Bava Basra vacillates back and forth whether or not you could be makne something to a kone when the kone's kalim are in the rishus of the makne of the mocher. Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel. The Gemara gives a number of answers, the first of which is the name of Shmuel. Kigon shahoisa kalta tluya ba. That the kalsa, the kli, was not al gavi karka, which would mean it's batel the rishus of the Baal, of the mocher, but rather it's suspended in midair. And therefore, it's considered as if he gave the get into the yad ha'isha. The fact that this kalsa is in the rishus of the Baal is not mavatel the rishus of the kalsa. The kalsa remains a separate, independent rishus. So again, according to Shmuel, if the kalta was on the karka, then it's batel to the rishus of the Baal, who is the makne, and therefore it would be a problem of kelov shalokeh p'shus mocher, according to that mandiyam lo kon. But now that it's tluya, we're going to say that the Baal is not makpid on the kalta. The kalta remains a separate entity from his rishus, and therefore it's not a case of kelov shalokeh p'shus mocher. Rav Shimon Lakish Omer offers a second answer. Kshura, afal pishena tluya. It could be that Enoch Hinami says Reish Lakish, the kalta is on the karka, but it's tied down to her body. And therefore, even though it's dragging on the karka, she could be koned to get with that kalta because it's tied down to her and it's considered like her rishus. It's not batil to the Baal's rishus, but rather it's in her rishus. Rav Ada bar Ava, a third answer, kigon shaita kalta munachat laben yerchotea. The Baal's not makpid on the place where she sits. And therefore, if her kalta is between her legs where she's sitting, therefore, that makom is kanula, it's a separate rishus unto itself. And a fourth answer is that of Rav Misharshia bar Rav Dimi Omar, kigon shahaisa bala mocher klosos. So the Baal has a store in which he sells these kind of baskets. It's a basket store. And in this place, many, many different baskets are situated. The Baal's not makpid. If she adds another basket, she's not really taking away from the ambiance of that makom. And now we get to the most radical answer, which in a sense deviates from all the other four answers we gave, and that's Rabbi Yochanan Omar, that Enoch Hinami, we can interpret the Mishnah in its simple way, and the kalta is on the ground of the chatzar Baal. Leave out all the ukimtos that we mentioned earlier, and don't prove from here that kelov shalokeh p'shus mocher kana lokeach. Why? Because makom cheka kanula, makom kalta kanula. The Baal, when he wants to give a get to his wife, he's makne the makom where her chatzar is. So, for example, if she can receive the get in her bosom or in her sal that's on the karka, the Baal is makna her the makom so that it's no longer b'shus haBaal, and he does so in order to achieve his goal of nesinas haget. Amar Rav, my time to Rabbi Yochanan, if sheina the makpid lo makom cheka v'lo makom kalta. When a man invites his wife to live together in the house, and even though the man owns the house, he's not makpid on the place that she puts down her kalim. And it was Almanas Kain with that understanding that he invited her into the house, that her Kli Tashmishim should be with her together. And he's not makpid wherever she puts the kalim. And he's makna the makom wherever she puts down her utensils, her vessels. Tanya Rabbi Yochi weren't thusly to support Rabbi Yochanan for a brisa. Zrakola l'toch chekel l'toch kalta o l'toch kol davar shu kikalta. In other words, any kli that's miyuchad l'tashmisha for her purposes are raised on gureshes. And from the language of the brisa called davar shehu kikalta, we prove that there's a special reasoning in kalta why she's megureshes. And that's what the brisa is trying to add here, called davar shehu kikalta. If you're talking about the other Amoraim, the reason why Kalta is Konela is because of specific situations. It's Kshura, it's Tluya, it's Bein Yarchosea, the Baal is a Mocher Klasos. So therefore, there's no special Chiddush in the word Kolsa here. It's like anything else. Anything that was tied down or would be Bein Yarchosea, etc., would be kona for it's a separate rishus. But the brisa add kol davar shehi kekalta to imply the principle of Rabbi Yochanan that the reason why kalta is a valid get is because it's a kli tashmisha and it's for her use, and the Baal is not makbid on the makom of a kli tashmisha. And that's what the brisa gained by adding the words kol davar shehu kekalta. Now the brisa says, "Kol davar shu kikalta latuye ma'ila tuye taska the achla batamri." Even a very small basket where they put the dates, even in that case, the place where that small sack is located is kanula. And now we get to the Mishnah here on Daf Ayin Ches Amud Aleph. This Mishnah is going to deal with the issue of whether or not b'shas nesina does she have to be aware of the fact that she's receiving a get. And the Tanakama says, Amala kinsi shtarchov zeh. He fools her into believing that this document that he's telling her to take for herself is really just a shtarchov. And that's the impression she has. She doesn't believe, she doesn't know that it's a get for the purpose of gerushin. And if the Baal does not tell her, as we'll soon see, Hegi Tech, and notify her eventually that it is a get, then this is not a Ma'aseh Gerushin that's valid. And Tosfos here, Dibra Maschil, Eino Get, is going to explain that a woman has to know that she is Megureshes. If not, it becomes Meshalcha V'hi Choseres. And the Gemara in Yevamos, on Daf Kufiyud Gimel Amid Beis establishes that a shota cannot be included in a get because she's Meshalcha V'choseres. And here this woman, even though she's not a shota, is basically Meshalcha V'choseres. She has no clue that she's being divorced. And therefore we're going to need in every Nesina that he notify her, hey Gittin. That's the essence of this Tosfos here. You'll take a look at the last couple of lines, or the first couple of lines, and at the end he says, in order that she should know, that she shouldn't be a Meshalcha V'choseres. The Baal Amor says that there's no need for him to notify her Hagitech in a case where there are oskim b'inyan gerushin. So there's no formal requirement to declare Hegitech, according to the Baal Amor, but she has to know from context that she's receiving a get. Now there's a Pella here of a Gemara that we learned already on Daf Nun Hey, which now becomes an amazing Gemara in the light of what we're learning here. And the Gemara establishes that if the Baal tells the Eidim that, look, this is a get, I'm about to give it to my wife, and then he says to his wife, Kinsi Shtarchov Zeh, the Gemara establishes back on Nun Hey that that is a valid gerushin, even though she was not notified with Hegitech by the Baal, but the answer is that the Eidim will notify the Isha that this is a get. However, according to some Rishonim, the Eidim don't even have to notify her that she's a get. Tosfos has to notify her because otherwise she's a Meshalcha v'chozeres. But other Rishonim hold, no. We just have to know that the giving of the get was for the sake of Gerushin. And if he told the Eidim such, it's not worse than Oskim Yoso Inyan. So there's no need to notify her with Hegitech. And that's a Pella. The get was tied down to his back. She had no clue that this was a get. She takes it and finds out, Korah, she reads it, Vareu Gita. So the Mishnah says, Eino get. In these cases, the get is not chal. And according to Tosfos, as we said, until he notifies her hegitech, then she's a meshalcha v'chozeres, and the get can't be chal. Tosfos requires that in any nesinas a get whatsoever, the Baal has to declare hegitech. And the Pnei Yoshua is medaik from Tosfos that b'diavad, if he didn't say harei zegitech, eina megureshes klal. It's not a valid get. Now, does he have to say those magic words hegitech at the moment, synchronizing with the nesinas I get? It would seem from our Mishnah ad, the word ad indicates that the get right now is sort of suspended in midair. She thinks that it's, as far as his nesin is concerned, it was a shtarchov. But he adds hegitech at some later point, subsequent to the nesinas I get liyodah. And he says here in the footnote, Amira li'achar zman, according to some Rishonim, Amira li'achar zman eino mo'ila. It's not enough to say hagitech li'achar zman. However, the Rishonim and certainly the Achronim attack this, and they say that ad sheyomala hagitech means that you don't have to say hegitech dafka at that moment when he gives the get, but rather ba'oso maimad, somehow in that context. And the Avnei Beluim says that when he says hegitech, she would be megureshes l'mafreya from the time of the nesina. So quite clearly, the Avnei Beluim understood that the hegitech doesn't have to be recited at the time of the nesina, but afterwards, when he says hegitech, whether it's boso maimed, whatever it is, then the get is chala mafreya mishas nesina. And there's no need for a second nesina. The Mishnah continues, Nasan biyadav hiyashena. What's the deal if the Baal gives the get over to his wife and she's sleeping? That means she doesn't have das to be shomer as Gita. And apparently, even if he notifies the Eidim that he's about to give her a get, when he gives it to her and she's Yeshena, the get is not chal. Not like the case earlier of Kinsi Shtarchov, where it was meaningful if he told the Eidim, and the Eidim would notify her that she's getting a get, but here she's sleeping, so nobody's notifying her anything. Is Eino get at Shiyomar La Hegitech. When she wakes up, the Baal says to her Hegitech, and then the get is chal. The Gemara says the following. What does the Mishnah mean that if she finds the get me'achorov and she takes the get from his knapsack over his back, and the Baal later on says hegitech, that she's megureshes? Frek the Gemara ki omala hegitech my havi. How is that going to help us when he notifies her it's a get? He didn't give her the get; she took it herself from the back of the Baal. Havi le tli gita b'gabe kashma b'rova tli gita b'gabe karpa lo amar klum. The Torah says v'nosan b'yoda. Not that she takes the get, but that he gives her the get. And the Gemara answers, Ema sheshalafato ne'achoro. It means the get was somehow, stuffed in between his belt and his hip, and she pulled it out. So the Gemara asks immediately, Shalfato nami habi'ina v'nasa b'yadav. This is still kli gittin because she takes it out of his belt. She could not possibly have access to the get because it's tied very, very tightly. And what the Baal did was he moved his hip in her direction in such a way that now she could get access to the get, v'shol fateh, and she takes the get. So what made it possible for her to take the get? It was his action of ark lechartze. And therefore that's considered a Maisa Nesina, and there's no problem of V'nosan b'yada of Tli Gittin Kabel Karka. Then he has to say to Hagitech, and at that point she's Megureshes, or as we said in the name of the Avnei Miluim, L'mafreya b'shas Orek Lechartze, Tanya Nami Hachi. We have a price to support this. Amar La, Hinsi Shtarchov Se, Oshla Fato Me'achora. This is interesting. If you compare the language of this brisa to the language of the Mishnah, the Mishnah says, Mitzato me'achorov. But the brisa is much more clear. It says shlafato me'achorov, that she pulled it out. Karato v'arei higita eino gerat shiyomala geticha to Rebbe Shimon Galil ben Elazar Omer liol ben gerat shitlenem ben v'yachsav mimenu v'yachsav yomala hagita. So getting back to Rebbe, the Tanakama, he holds that it's a case of shlafato me'achorov. It's not the language of the Mishnah matzato me'achorov. So it must be that Rebbe's talking about a different scenario, and that's called Orek Lechartze. Ikem abal es masna. What is the shita of Reb Shimon Gamel Elazar? He holds that the Amir of Hagitech has to be exactly synchronized b'shas nesina. So in other words, Hagitech, notifying her that she is receiving a get, is part and parcel of the nesina v'nosan b'yoda. It cannot come subsequently. Whereas according to Rebbe, and that's what we saw in our Mishnah, the Hagitech is a separate Tanai, as Tosfos says, to make her into a Mishal Chavein Choseres. But as far as the nesina is concerned, the nesina was a full-fledged nesina. Elamai, there's another Tanai, another condition that he has to notify her. That condition could be fulfilled subsequent to the Maisa Nesina. It's not like the Shita of Shimon ben Elazar, where the Hagitech is essentially part of the Nesina itself. The Brisa continues. Nisano biyadavi yishena. She's asleep when he gives her the get. Ni ora v'kora v'reyu gita eno get. Ad sheyomala Hagitech diri red. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar Omer, we have now an exact repetition of what we learned before. The only difference was before it was a case of Kinsi Shtarchov Zeh. Now it's a case of Hi Yeshena. Now again, the Shita of Shimon ben Elazar is very consistent. If she doesn't have Das to be Shomer as Gita, B'shas, as long as she's sleeping when the Baal did the Nesina, then the Nesina is not a valid Nesina. So he's got to take back the get and give another Nesina. Utsricha. Gemara says we need both records and formulations of the Machlok Shin Rebbe and Shemillah. So to eat Marbach Kamaisa, if we only had this Machlok in the case of Kinsi Shtarchov Zeh, I would have thought Vahi Kama Rebbe. That's where Rebbe says that the original Nesina is valid and there's no need to take back the get and give a second Nesina Mishum Debas Igrushehi. She is awake. and she's a bas gerushin. And therefore, the chisaron is just that external chisaron of hegitech. He has to say to her hegitech. And that's when he could do it later on. Avol nosav yishena, that's a whole different story. That's la barigurshehi. She's not a bas gerushin. And why is that? Because she's not shomeres as Gita. And Ema Modulela Reb Shimon ben Elazar. If I only had my logic to compel me, I would say that here Rebbe would concede that the fact that she wakes up later on and finds out that she has a get, and he says hagitech, that's not going to help us. The nesina itself was a nesina to a woman who's a lav bas gerushin, and that's not a nesina. And now we can flip it around the other way. If the Bryce had only recorded the machlokas Rebbe and Reb Shimon ben Elazar in the case of Yisheno, where she's sleeping, bahak amar Reb Shimon ben Elazar, that's where Reb Shimon ben Elazar requires a second nesina, because she was a lav bas gerushin while she was sleeping. In the case of Kinsi Shtarchov Zeh, Ema Modole, since she is a bas gerushin, maybe Reb Shimon ben Elazar would concede to Rebbe, and all he needs is an amira of hegitech to notify her that she's getting a get when she wakes up. I'm sorry, when she realizes that it's not a shtarchov. But she's a bas gerushin, and therefore maybe Reb Shimon ben Elazar would concede to Rebbe that this would be a valid get. Therefore, the Tan has to tell me this case as well. Amar Rava kosav la get unasar biyada avda. He gave the get into the hands of her eved, and the eved is a chotzer that could be kona on behalf of the adon, the baal chotzer. In this case, the baal chotzer. If he was yoshem, if the Eved did not have a das to be shomer on his own, independent of the Isha, Umeshamrato, and she supervises and makes sure that the get is properly guarded. Hariz a get. This is a chotzer hamishtameres. And the chotzer, now the Eved, since the Eved is sleeping, is mishtameres l'daita. But if he's awake, and you might say, well, he's the chutz of the Isha. No. Ain't no get. The get is not valid when it's placed into the hands of an Eved of the Isha who is Niyar. Because if he's Niyar, then he's Mishamer Liatzmo. He has his own das, and anything that's in his hands, he's Mishayer Lidaito for his own benefit. And here the Rishonim raised the question, right? If he's ne'er, it's mishtaber shalol l'daito, but rather l'da'ato. And a chotzer to be kona needs to be shaveres l'das habayla. And the Eved himself has his own das, and he's mishamer l'daito. But here the Rishonim asked the following question: from whence do we derive chotzer? We derive it from yad. Oh, wait a minute. Let me say this. The Gemara says the following: Yoshin v'shamrato hareze get amai. You're going to tell me that the Eved is a chotzer for the Isha if he's Yoshin, and she is shomeres as chatzera. Frek the Gemara chotzer malechasi. The Eved is a movable chotzer. He's in motion. He has locution, and the Gemara establishes bab mitzia chotzer malechas lo kana. There's no kinyan in the case of a chotzer maleches. And Rava himself in Bab Metzia Daf Tesam Beis says that a chotzer maleches is not kona. Why is a chotzer maleches not kona? So the Rosh says that a chotzer is mishum yad, and just like a yad is eina maleches, so too a chotzer has to be eina maleches. Now, what does it mean that a yad is not maleches? I mean, after all, whenever a person moves, the yad moves with the person. But it means that the yad is not in and of itself maleches. Wherever the guf goes, the yad goes along. So the guf is molech the yad, but the yad has no inherent locution. However, the Ramban says that Enoch Hinami Yad is a Yad HaMaleches, but it never leaves the Kona. It's always somehow attached to the Kona because the hand is attached to the body. But in a Chotzer Maleches, as the Chotzer is in motion, it gets further and further away from the Kona. So the Gemara answers vehilchas abekafus, or ela bekafus, according to Gears. It means that according to Rava, when a man gives a get to the eved of an isha and the eved is yashin, the get is only valid if the eved is tied up and he has no possibility of moving. He's eno yochel halech, and therefore he's a chatzah shenim halechas. Now here we have a machlokas rishon. Tosas shita is you need both yoshein and kafus, because the two chisronos in the eved. On the one hand, the eved is a chatzah malechas, and therefore it need kafus. On the other hand, the eved has das, and therefore he's mishtameres l'das ha'eved and not l'dato, and therefore I need yoshein. So I need both. Kafus and yoshein. The Rambam holds that all you need is kafus. And even though he's niyar, the get will be chal. Vaita. The Mishnah says, Hoisa omedes b'shasarabim uzrakola, if she's standing in b'shasarabim and the Baal throws the get. And the get falls karav la, closer to her than to him, migoreshes. But if it falls karav low, eina migoreshes. Mechtal mechta. If it falls in a place that's equidistant for both him and her, migoreshes ve'eina migoreshes, it's a safek migoreshes. By the way, just on the side, we had a Gemara about mizonos that, trying to remember where the Gemara was, but in any event, the Gemara established, if you remember, that the Baal, even in the case of Safek Gerushin, still is chayav in mizonos, because she's muchzak in the mizonos. And therefore, misafek, we can't take it out of her chazak. I think it was on Ayin Dalet, if I'm not mistaken. Anyway, b'chein linyan kiddushin. If a man is Makadish and Isha, he throws the Kesef Kiddushin and it falls Karav Lo, she's Mekudesh. It's Karav Lo, Eina Mekudesh. Mechsal Mechza, Safik Mekudesh. V'chein Linyan Chov. What does it mean, Chov? The Love throws the mos towards the Malva. Is that called a Piron? Let's say later on, the mos just fly into the air and they're gone. Amalo Bal Chovot Zrokli Chovi. And later on, the Gemara is going to interpret this Mishnah that he said, Malva said, throw me the mos in the way that you would throw a get to an Isha. Uzrako lo. And the Lova complied with the will and the command of the Malva. And the mos got lost before they got to the hands of the Malva. Karav la Malva. If the mos fell closer to the Malva Zocha Malva, therefore, the Lova is patur. But Karav Lova, if he threw it and it landed closer to the Lova, that's not a Piron, and the Lova is still Chai. Mechtal Mechza Shneim Yachlok. Now, there's a question here that Tosas later on in Amid Beis is going to raise. Why do we say Yachloku in the Chov? After all, there's a Chezkas Chov. And before the Lova actually threw the mos, he was certainly Chai. So the burden of proof should be on him, Amotzi Chavero, to establish that the mos actually were closer to the Malva. But I would say that this is not a suffix b'mitzius, this is a suffix al pi din, meaning it fell actually in a place that's equidistant to both the Malva and the Lova. That establishes a question about how we define a Puron Chov for purposes of Kinyan HaMalvin. The Gemara raises the following question. Hechi Dami. What is the case of Karav Lo? Hechi Dami Karav Lo. Amar Rav. If the get falls toch arba amos shalo, zeu Karav Lo. If it falls toch arba amos shalo, zeu Karav Lo. So this Gemara of Rav is based on a Takanas Chachamim, which is formulated by the Gemara above Metzia Daf Yud, that arba amos shel adam konos lo b'rshus Rav. So if, let's say, an object of hefker falls into the radius of Dalet Amos of a person standing in b'rshus Rav, that person is koneh. And here too, when the get fell within the Dalet Amos of the Isha, she was zoch in the get. But if it fell within the Dalet Amos of the Baal, Eina Megureshes. That's called Karov Lo. So what's a case where it fell Mechtal Mechza? And if you're going to tell me that one person got there before the other person, so why is it Mechtal Mechza? Let's just figure out who got there first. And who is Kona the Dalet Amos? Well, they're both occupying the same Arba Amos. This is not a Mechtal Mechta, this is not a suffix. We just have to figure out who came first. Whoever came first, let's say she came first, she was Zochen all the Dalet Amos. When he comes later into that Dalet Amos, he's walking into Harishus, and therefore she could be Kona the get. So even if it's Shneim Omdim the Arba Amos, it should be a valid get because she got there first. V'chi Tema, what are you going to tell me? The Asut Shavai Badi Adodi, they both came simultaneously to the split fraction of a second, and therefore they're both Kona the Dalet Amos. We have a principle that you can't be mitzamtzin two actions to establish that they both occurred exactly simultaneously. So the one who gets there first was Zocha, the Dalet Amos. So I don't get it. I mean, we have EF Shalitzamtzim, so we have a suffix who got there first, but we don't know who got there first. So it's a suffix Megureshes. What's bothering the Gemara here? So the Gemara apparently differentiates between two categories of suffix. There's a suffix which is called Chisaron Yediyah, and there's a suffix which is called a suffix Gomur. It's an absolute suffix. There's no Yediyah that could be poshet the suffix. And the Gemara understood that when the Mishnah says Mechtal Mechza, it's not a Chisaron Yediyah. If it would have been a Chisaron Yediyah, the Mishnah should have said Safek Karv Lo, Safek Karv Lo, Lo. But Mechtal Mechza implies a whole different category of a suffix. It's not just Chisaron Yediyah. And therefore, the Gemara finds it difficult to understand that Mishnah if it's Asu Travay Badi Adodi and Yefshel Tzamtu, we don't know who came first. That's a Chisaron Yediyah. That's not Mechtal Mechta. Elomar Rav Kahana Hocha B'Shmona Amos Mitzumtzomos Haskinon. The Mishnah is talking about a case where she and he are situated at a distance of exactly 8 amos, not more and not less. So each one was zoche in 4 amos, going in this direction towards the right, or this direction, towards the left or towards the right. And now the get falls exactly in the overlap, meaning the get overlaps half in her Dalet Amos and half in his Dalet Amos.